Hi, everyone. I'm attorney Donna DiMaggio Berger, and this is Take It to the Board, where we speak condo and HOA. Today's episode of Take It to the Board is our 50th episode, and in the spirit of celebrating the tremendous growth our podcast has experienced, I thought it was only fitting to give our listeners a little peek behind the curtains. They say behind every good man is a great woman, but the reverse is also very true. I'm being joined today by my husband, Michael, who is also an attorney and has learned what it means to be married to a community association attorney over the last 33 years. Michael and I met at the University of Miami Law School. I'll let him tell the story. And we got married soon after graduation. We moved several months later into a townhome community in Aventura, Florida. I talk about the experience of our interview with the president of the Condominium Association in the introduction to this podcast. At one point, we were specially assessed to pay for a skylight replacement project, only to have those skylights fail a few months later. We had a massive flood in our unit when our son Ryan was just a few days old, forcing us to leave in the middle of the night along with the baby nurse. Now, just a little bit of background on my better half. Michael attended the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School and received his JD from the University of Miami on a full scholarship because he was pretty smart. He received the top score on the bar exam in the third DCA. Okay, I'm just going to say it. I did well, but not that well, and started his legal career at Schutz & Bowen. He then transitioned into a family business, Ritchie Swimwear, and in 2008, he opened his own law firm, Carpenter & Berger, with his partner, Joe Carpenter. Michael specializes in business and real estate transactions, representing small and medium-sized businesses in a variety of industries: retail, restaurants, manufacturing, construction trade, technology, property management, and family office. Michael was appointed to the Broward County Human Rights Board in May 2017, and he's been married to this podcast host since 1990. So, Michael, welcome to Take It to the Board.
Thank you, Donna. That was a wonderful introduction, and I am greatly appreciative of you having me on the show, although I have to say I'm feeling a lot of pressure because if I mess up, the podcast is going to come home and give it to me. So I will do my best. Pleasure to be here. So
I mentioned that there was a story about our meeting at UM Law School. I'll let you tell it.
So we started law school in 1986. But we were not in the same section. So in first year of law school, typically you're with the same group of people for all your introductory classes. So I don't think we actually formally met first year, although I have to say I had my eye on you, so to speak. But we did have a class second year of law school. I forget the nature of the class, and we still didn't know each other. But one day during class, I think there was a break in the action, so to speak, and all of a sudden I see you walking behind some other guy in our class, I won't mention his name, who's running away from you with one of your shoes. And for some reason, you stopped by me and said, "Michael, can you please get my shoe back?" And I'm like, okay, I'll do my best. And apparently I succeeded because here we are 35 years later talking on a podcast. So I guess you would call that a meet cute in Hollywood speak.
We all became lawyers and we're doing things like stealing people's shoes. I think it was constitutional law that was the class we were in. I also want to say that we're not the same age, Michael. We're not even the same generation because I did graduate college in 3 years. So I just want to make that clear to our podcast audience. So, Michael, I don't recall either of us ever expressing any interest in condominium law. When you were at UM, did you know what kind of law you wanted to go into?
Honestly, when I was in law school, I thought I wanted to become a sports agent. Played basketball all my life, now play a lot of tennis, love to play sports. Love the idea of becoming an agent. The famous scene in Jerry Maguire where Cuba Gooding makes the agent yell out to show me the money. But somewhere along the line and during law school, I realized that wasn't for me. And, I ultimately started out as a commercial and real estate litigation attorney at Schutz & Bowen, which is the oldest existing running law firm in Miami.
What building was Schutz in?
The Miami Center, which is where the Hotel Intercontinental is.
And you used to try to tease me when we get on the people mover and get me to go into the wrong people mover, knowing my terrible sense of direction. Remember that?
Yeah, and I guess that was kind of mean because you were pregnant at the time.
Mean to me and our son, Ryan. And Ryan's actually the reason I became a condo attorney. As you know, I started out doing banking and real estate in a boutique firm in downtown Miami. And then when we had Ryan, didn't want to keep going down there and was contacted by Becker and decided, sure, association law sounded pretty good. But I want to talk about our first home. After we got married, we bought a townhouse in Aventura. It was attached townhomes, and it was a condominium association. Do you remember our interview with the then board president of that association? It was my first interview in front of a condo president. Was it yours?
When I was lucky enough during law school to live in a small condo a few minutes from the University of Miami, but my parents had bought the condo in their name, so I don't think I was actually the one who went to the interview. So I think, yes, I think it was my first interview, and I'm not sure my recollection is the same or as good as yours as to that interview. I do remember that the president of the association made some sort of a comment that, as long as I like you, you'll be in. Except, the other part of the equation was that he was also a realtor on the deal. So guess what? We were getting in because he wanted his commission. So I wasn't terribly worried.
Wait, that's right. He was the realtor selling us the unit and then interviewing us. Oh, there's no conflict of interest there. I do remember that clubhouse. We were sitting there like two little babies in this clubhouse, and there was nobody else there. It was just him. And he sort of ran through the rules, and he did make that profound statement that if I like you, you're in, and if I don't, you're not. And we kind of looked at each other and said, "Gosh, I hope he likes us." And we did get in. And then, of course, I mentioned this in the introduction. We had a special assessment to pay for a skylight project. If you remember, those townhouses in Aventura were very high, 2 stories, and then they had 2 skylights. I think one was over the dining room and one was over that walkway.
Honestly, I don't. I know we had skylights, and honestly, I don't remember a special assessment, but I do remember, and I'm not questioning, I'm sure you're right, but I do remember that we had a lot of problems with the skylight, and it was constantly leaking, and we were making numerous complaints to the board of directors and to the property management company, and they didn't address our complaints. And then the flood of all floods that you referenced in the introduction occurred when our son Ryan was about 3 or 4 days old. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night. It was like 2:00 in the morning, and the alarm was going off because of the water flooding in. And, we were both groggy because we had a newborn baby, and we were getting up every couple of hours so you could feed Ryan. And I'm walking around and I see water coming in, and I'm thinking, this has got to be a dream. This is not really happening. And then, eventually I snapped out of it and said, we got a problem. And, eventually we had to evacuate with our son and the baby nurse.
So the baby nurse was like 80 years old. Do you remember her name?
Esther.
Esther, that's right. We had to bundle Esther out of this place and go to my parents. The reason I mentioned that, though, is because that was my first experience of dealing with decisions made by a board of directors when it came to maintenance of the common elements and how it impacts owners. So at that point, I was not a savvy condominium association attorney. You were not on the board of directors of the association. And we kind of were, at the mercy of the decisions that were being made. I remember at the time the chatter was that there may have been some corruption going on in terms of the contractor that was selected and the actual amount of work that was done. All we know for sure is that our skylights blew out, and we had a baby that was only days old, and we had to beat a hasty retreat out of the house.
Yeah. The one thing I do remember is we were fortunate because, we had probably 3 inches of water on the ground floor of our apartment. It was a 2-story townhouse. But luckily we had tile and not carpeting. So, getting the water out, I mean, it was a disaster, but it could have been a lot worse if we had carpeting.
So, Michael, we moved into the single family home in Plantation when Ryan was 2. And it was a switch from a condominium association to an HOA. How long after we moved in did you get on the homeowner association board?
I think we moved in late 2003. And, we lived there a couple of years before I got on the board. I think it was around 2006. And, the way our documents are set up in our community, there's 2-year terms. And I'm pretty sure I served 4 or 5 terms. So it's either 8 to 10 years I was on the board.
8 to 10 years. Why did you stay on the board that long?
For one thing, it's a big investment. And, a couple of years after we had moved in, we had our daughter, Lauren. And, I knew we were going to raise our children there. We love the community. And, I thought it was a good idea to have an attorney on the board. And, also I thought it was a good idea for one of us to keep an eye on things. And I think I was elected the chore. You had enough to handle with two young children at the time. And honestly, I think it's something that all residents in the community should do. You're running your own community. You need to participate and not just sit on the sidelines and be a critic. I think you actually have to get involved. And, we'll probably talk a little bit more about it as we go on. But, we've lived here over 30 years, and I think we have, I can't speak to say that we have the best community in Broward County because I haven't lived everywhere else. But I haven't been to a place where I'd rather live than where we live. So it was really my pleasure to serve the community. And I love the fact that we still live here.
What were some of the projects or problems you were on the board that long, 8 to 10 years. Any major accomplishments during your time on the board?
I'm not sure about accomplishments, but we were kind of lucky. Things were kind of quiet, and our community is pretty quiet for the most part. We haven't had a lot of things go on while over the 30 years that we've lived here. Subsequent to my years of service, the Florida Department of Transportation came in and gave the country club that we share the community with a bunch of money, to rebuild the golf course because they needed drainage when 595 was widened. I think one of the things that I recall happened while I was actually on the board is that the country club, which at the time was a member-owned club, they were struggling a little bit financially, and going back more than 25 years. And one of the things they were looking to do to help, shore up the finances of the country club was to develop a portion of their land near where the clubhouse is. And they were looking to, work with a developer and I think build maybe 10 or 12 townhouse units. And, we started having preliminary discussions as to whether or not those units would become part of the association or would they be separate as part of some sort of shared use agreement. Ultimately, the development deal fell through. So, nothing ever came of that. But that was one of the things I recall working on. Other than the garden variety, your roof needs to be cleaned. You need to, do something with your driveway or fix your mailbox. I honestly don't recall having any major issues, fortunately.
Yeah, but our board has always been, I don't want to say casual, but they've been, they certainly haven't been the stereotypical condo commandos in terms of those aesthetic issues. Yes, there's a recognition that everything has to look aesthetically pleasing and the rules and regulations are going to be enforced. But I never got the sense that our board, and it's changed over the years, but we do have some overlap from year to year in terms of board members. I never got the sense that they were the type to be unreasonable when it came to enforcement.
No, I think that's true. And I think that speaks to the type of community we live in. We generally don't have people who live here who need to be dealt with in what could be considered an unreasonable way. Not that we haven't had some issues over the course of time, but you could probably count them on serious issues with residents on one hand and without using all your fingers. We're very lucky in that sense.
I served on the board for I only made it 2 years, but by that time I was already an association attorney. So it's what I did during the day. And then I remember you got off the board and they said, well, there's the Berger lawyer seat available. Donna, will you take it? And I took it. We did not have as many big projects as you had. I think the main project we had during my time on the board was a landscaping project. I think people get a lot more excited about the landscaping projects. I remember we built a gazebo, we did the landscaping around the perimeter wall, and we planted live oaks in the swale. So I think for our homeowners association residents listening, that's going to ring true for them because in a lot of our communities, there's a big emphasis on landscaping.
Well, good thing for you because, you're dealing with this stuff all day long to come home and have to deal with it in your own community. That probably wasn't the best thing. And as I recall, after your 2-year sentence, 2 years of service, I'm pretty sure it was my partner, Joe, who took over for you. And he was actually involved during the FDOT project, unfortunately for him, because that was a bit of a quagmire dealing with, with the club and the Florida Department of Transportation. Eventually it got worked out and we got a brand new, beautifully redone golf course, but it was not without its challenges. So I think we were both fortunate that Joe took the hit on that one rather than one of us.
Thank you, Joe. But there's a message here. We've both acknowledged how well-run our home community is, and we're certainly not the only well-run home community. I represent many, many well-run communities, but what it takes is people willing to put in the time and willing to collaborate. A lot of times people don't understand how much time actually goes into it, although it's a little bit different. Our community is 98 homes, and we've got 2 lodges with condo units, but we're self-managed, and that requires even more of a commitment in terms of time.
No, it definitely does. And, we're fortunate to have had board members over the years willing to serve. We use an accounting firm to do our collections and bookkeeping, and tax returns, but we have members of the board actually doing the hard work. The day-to-day financing is done by our treasurer. We have somebody who's in charge of security. We have somebody who's in charge of maintenance. We have somebody who's in charge with, relationship with the club, condo liaison. And, they all do a lot of work and spend a lot of time. And, we're very lucky to find 7 people willing to serve all the time, especially since we don't have that large of a community and that large of a pool of people to draw from. So we're very lucky to have people willing to do it.
So you're going to get back on the board, Michael?
I mean, you never say never. It's not my first priority, but you never know.
Well, right now you're in charge of sending out the mass email. So I talk to a lot of clients about communication portals, especially now we've got a lot that are undertaking major repair and renovation projects. And it's important that you have a number of different communication portals to let people know what's going on. Are we doing the roof? Where do I have to park? When it's hurricane season, keep people apprised of perhaps the storm and storm preparation. Our group email, first of all, how did you get involved? How did you become the lead email master in the community?
Well, as you recall, I'm going back maybe 20 years or so, we started a small side business developing website templates for community associations. So, one of our...
I did not recall that. We did start a website business. It wasn't long-lived.
Well, it was called mycommunityassociation.com, which I think was a pretty clever name. Unfortunately, we were both working full-time, so we really couldn't get it up and running the way we did. But we had a number of associations that did sign up for our service, and one of them was our home community. And part of the deal with them signing up with our company, which we eventually sold for very little money a few years later. But one of the terms of signing up with the service was that I had to be the administrator, and I've kept that job for about 20 years now, and I'm happy to do it. It's a matter of plugging in email copy into a template and sending it out to the community, and I think it's a great service to have because it's just such a simple way to keep everybody informed as to what's going on.
What's the strangest mass email you had to send out?
So this really wasn't really like an alert, like anything important, but oddly enough, in our community about 10 years ago, we had an otter sighting. So the resident who saw the otters in their backyard sent me the pictures, and I sent it out, and I got a bunch of responses like, "Are you kidding me? We know we have alligators. We know we have a bunch of other things in our community, but we have otters." And that off the top of my head, that's the one that kind of sticks out. I
remember there was a coyote. I think you sent out an email about a coyote, and certainly we've had alligators from time to time. And you've told people, well, the board has told people through you to bring in their pets to make sure that there's not any issue. I said at the outset, this is our 50th episode. 50 episodes. Do you remember when I first said to you I was going to start a podcast? It was during the pandemic, and I was listening to podcasts all the time, much to your chagrin, I think, because I was listening to them without my earbuds in.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think our tastes in podcasts are a little bit different. I tend to like to listen to podcasts from NPR or the local NPR station. And you like to listen to podcasts for people who are trying to help you live to 130. And they're interesting and I'd like to live a long time. Just not my cup of tea.
It's called biohacking, Michael. And I listen to a variety of podcasts, not just biohacking podcasts, but the reason I bring this up is because I've wanted to have somebody on talking about cooperatives, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but cooperatives are definitely a different animal, and particularly down here in Florida, Florida cooperative is a different beast from a New York cooperative, but you represented a cooperative at one point. What kind of work did you handle for them?
So I was engaged by a co-op in Fort Lauderdale that I think it was your firm. I think that's how I got the referral. Your firm was general counsel, and they engaged me on a limited basis to handle transfers. So transfers of co-ops are a little bit different than when you sell your house or a condo, where you just, at closing, you sign a deed and that's the transfer of title. In a co-op, you have like a proprietary lease. So you have to do an assignment of the proprietary lease. You have to work with the association. So, I was engaged to, set up a form policy as to how, units would be transferred from, the old owner to the new owner. And, I would work with the buyer, seller, and the association to make that happen. And I did that for about 5 or 6 years. And, as is typical when you work for an association, which obviously very well, when there's a changing of the guard and the board, sometimes the lawyer, the property manager, the vendors don't survive. And there was a changing of the guard, and, I did survive a little while, but eventually they decided to use somebody else or use some other procedure. But it was interesting that I got to live in your world a little bit because, although I handled mostly transfers, I did get involved with a couple of other matters. And honestly, after working with the Cooperative Association for 4 or 5 years, whatever it was, I had newfound and even higher respect for you in dealing with what you deal with.
It's not easy, because I started out in real estate as well, and it still puzzles me to this day when people are closing on units. They're buying properties, homes, condo units, cooperative units, and they don't think to retain an attorney to assist them with that purchase. I include, even if I suggest that you get your attorney to even walk you through the governing documents. You've got the 3-day right of rescission. Get an attorney to walk you through those governing documents and highlight any potential red flags that might not be a good fit for that purchase decision. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And, maybe I'm biased because I do a lot of real estate work, but it's hard to imagine, for most people, buying a home or a condo, as the case may be, is the most, could be the biggest investment they make in their entire life, and spending hundreds and nowadays, maybe millions of dollars to buy a house, and to not hire an attorney to review your contract to make sure your title is clear, and doesn't make sense to save a few $1,000s when you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or more. It just does not make sense. But sometimes people are penny wise and dollar foolish. Although
now, if you're purchasing, and particularly in an older coastal building, you're also going to want to be reviewing the milestone inspection and the structural integrity reserve study. So the purchase decision, it has become a lot more significant than just you like the view and you like the layout of the property. As a corporate attorney, Michael, you've done work for management companies, some security companies, and other what I like to call community association adjacent companies. What are some of the problem areas for those companies when working with community associations?
Most of the work that I've done for my clients that deal with community associations are largely related to negotiating the contracts. All my clients, like any vendor, they have standard agreement forms that they like to use. And, obviously if the association is smart, they have it reviewed by, counsel like you or whoever their association attorney might be. And, sometimes the changes are such that, the client will want me to review and give my blessing to it. But, and that's probably 90% of the work I do with those type of clients. But every once in a while I do get a call from either a security company or a management company. And usually the issue relates to an issue, not so much with the board, although there could be issues like terminating the contract as such. But most of the time there's an issue with a particular resident who's causing trouble, maybe threatening, an employee or such. So it's probably a lot like the problems you deal with. It's because you're dealing with somebody who lives in the community that doesn't want to play by the rules and doesn't want to play nice, so to speak.
One of my most well-attended classes here at Becker is dealing with difficult people. And we talk about that. We talk about residents who, like to interfere with the vendors, whether it's the painting contractor or the security personnel or front desk staff, whatever it is, that can become a problem. You rarely talk about your work, but you recently told me a story about a security issue with one of your clients without naming names. I found that to be very interesting. Care to share?
Yeah, the story basically was the resident, knowing that car theft is rampant, not only car theft, but people, groups of mostly younger kids running around, looking for unlocked doors to steal stuff. They left their car door open in a guard gated, secure community for what it's worth. But not only that, they left the keys in the car. And shockingly, the car went missing. And I guess they had LoJack or something, but they did get the car back. And there was supposedly some damage to the car. And they went to the security company to pay for the cost of the damages because they didn't stop them at the gate. And I don't want to repeat what I told my client, what they should tell the person making the demand, but I think that's ridiculous. You need to be responsible. Security companies obviously need to follow their post orders and do their job. But you need to take responsibility for securing your possessions, and something as simple as locking your car door and taking the keys out of it, that shouldn't be a challenge for anyone.
Well, I will say in 33 years, I don't think we've ever had much overlap in terms of clientele and projects, but I will tell you that one of the most airtight indemnification clauses I ever saw in a management agreement that I was tearing my hair out about, because remember, I'm looking to have the association indemnified for everything, was one you drafted. I didn't know it at the time. And I was saying to someone, who drafted this language? I don't like it because, of course, you drafted it for your client, which was doing business with my client.
Thank you, I think.
Sorry is the right word. So you left Schutz, you went into a family business, a retail apparel business. I guess it was wholesale as well. And that was a family-owned business. Did any of your time working in a family-owned business inform your current approach as a business attorney? Because most business attorneys have never actually owned a business, and you have.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think the best education I ever got for being a business lawyer is running a business. You go to law school, you learn the basics. It does not really prepare you to be a business lawyer. Doing the work helps, but actually running a business was the best education I could have gotten. And, having a perspective for what business owners go through. I mean, if you have your own law firm, you're running a business, but, most lawyers, especially when they come out of law school, they go work for another firm. But, I learned how to, you deal with customers, you deal with vendors, you deal with, having to deal with cash flow. And, although I'm a business attorney, not a business advisor, having that perspective, I think, really helps me craft my advice in a practical sense that I think a lot of other lawyers maybe don't have the ability to do because they never sat in the shoes of a business owner.
I think that is so true. And I use that same approach. Listen, I joke about the fact that the 2 years I served on our HOA board was the longest 2 years of my life. I'm just joking. But it really does, when I talk to potential new clients, I let them know that I actually have had that experience, because it is, it does make a difference if you're a community association attorney, having sat on a board of directors, having had to make those decisions, having had to pay legal fees. So I think, I think you're in a really unique position to counsel your business clients, having been a business owner who's read P&L statements and, understand inventory and labor issues and everything else.
Well, and also I think the fact that, before I went into the family business, I handled litigation matters for 4.5 to 5 years. I think that also helped shape my perspective, because I understand that, although sometimes you have to go to court either to defend if somebody sues you or to sue somebody if it's significant enough, the last thing in the world that most businesses need is to be involved in litigation and, trying to avoid it at all costs, by, first of all, having, well-drafted, detailed contracts at the outset of a relationship, but also trying and doing everything you can to work out a dispute with whoever is on the other side of the dispute before you end up in court. I think having that litigation perspective also helps me with that in that regard.
So you've been serving on the Broward County Human Rights Board for the last few years. What's the mission of that organization? So
the Broward Human Rights Board actually has two roles. It has an advisory role under the Broward Human Rights Act. And the advisory role is to advise the Broward County Commission on matters relating to discrimination and the impacts it has on protected classes within our society. I've been on the board, I think, almost 6 years. I was appointed by Commissioner Geller in 2017. And some of the changes that we've recommended to the Broward the Broward County Commission that have been adopted during that time is, first of all, in 2019, the Broward County Commission, on our recommendation, passed an ordinance joining or adopting the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is known by the acronym of CEDAW. Interestingly enough, last time I checked, almost every country in the world has adopted CEDAW, which is obviously a UN resolution that women should be treated equally to men, except for a handful of countries, the United States being one of which, along with Iran, North Korea, and a couple of other countries I can't recall at this time. Not exactly illustrious company to be in. And the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee voted in 2002 to recommend that the country adopt the ratification, and the Senate has to vote on it because it's considered a treaty. And for whatever reason, in the 20+ years since, with Republican, Democrat administrations and Congresses, so it's not one side or the other. For whatever reason, it just has not been adopted. So, numerous cities and counties around the country have, around the United States have adopted it. And Broward County did that in 2019. We also have, based on a recommendation, they've amended the Human Rights Ordinance to add protected classes. In 2017, we actually added veteran status or being an active service member as status protected under the Human Rights Ordinance. And although it's hard to believe that anyone would discriminate in matters of housing or accommodations or employment against a veteran or a service member, people who are willing to risk their lives to protect their country, it goes on. So that was a necessary thing, we felt, and fortunately the county commission adopted our recommendation. And the most recent change that we recommended that was adopted was in 2020, where victims of human trafficking were actually added as a protected class. And, similar to with the service members, it's hard to imagine that victims of the human trafficking would be discriminated against, but in matters of housing and even employment, they are, and that's just not right. And so, so that sort of summarizes what we do in our advisory role.
The last two things you said, I actually have had some experience with the human trafficking. So we represent some timeshare resorts in Florida. There's a lot of timeshare resorts. In one of my resorts, they believe that there may have been trafficking going on, and that opened up a discussion about local ordinances designed to combat trafficking and the signage that needs to be placed in a resort in terms of anywhere where you have public accommodations, any place of public accommodation where you've got short-term rentals, hotels, timeshare resorts, you need the signage. So that's one area where actually your work on the Broward County Human Rights Board, I saw it in action in one of my communities. The other is the veterans. So there is language when it comes to denying perhaps an applicant for purchase or lease. More often it's a lease where the applicant is a veteran, that you have to take certain steps. It doesn't mean that every veteran is going to make the perfect applicant to lease in your community, but it does mean that you need to take certain steps and discuss it with counsel. So you went through role. What's the next part, Michael?
The other role, besides the advisory role to the county commission, is that the Human Rights Board actually serves in a quasi-judicial manner. So when somebody files a complaint with the Broward County Human Rights Section, they have two ways of getting the matter resolved. They can take the steps to take the matter to litigation, or they can elect to go through the county's administrative process. So if they go through the county's administrative process and the matter does not get resolved, ultimately 3 members and an alternate from the Human Rights Board is actually chosen to hear the case. And it so happens that we've only had one case in the last 4 or 5 years, but I was actually chosen to be on that panel. And because I was the only lawyer on the panel, I was actually chosen to be the chair of the panel, which means I was actually the de facto judge for the case. So I had to make evidentiary rulings, which I haven't studied evidence since I did litigation 25 plus years. But it was a case involving a claim by a resident that the association was not enforcing its parking restrictions in a even-handed manner, and that they were discriminating against her in the enforcement of the rules based on her gender and her national origin, as I recall. Unfortunately, although I think she may have had the claimant may have had a pretty good case, she was not represented by counsel. I don't know if it's because she couldn't afford one, probably, or whatever the case may be. And the association naturally had very competent counsel. And although, part of us thought that she may have had a legitimate case, she just didn't prove it. And ultimately, we ruled that, in favor of the association. Had we ruled against the association, we could have actually granted her, remedies as authorized under the Human Rights Act, as if we were a court. And, if the association didn't comply, if we'd ruled against them, then the claimant could have taken our order to a court to actually get it enforced by a judge.
Well, is there any appellate procedure, though? If you had ruled against the association, could the association have any appeal?
I honestly don't know the answer to the question. I imagine there has to be, based on due process requirements, and they probably would be able to take the appeal up to, I would assume, a circuit court judge who would otherwise have the right to enforce the order.
Is there a charge associated with an owner bringing a claim in front of the Human Rights Board?
I do not think so. I'm not sure, but I don't think there's a filing fee. And if it is, I think it's relatively de minimis.
So many of the problems in community associations, though, they stem from the fact that people don't read the governing documents, or if they read them, they're not really understanding them. And the last part is not really their fault, because many of these governing documents, they're developer documents, they're riddled with legalese. I mean, it's hard even for seasoned community association attorneys to sometimes interpret what's being said. But the starting point is many people, they buy in communities and they don't read the governing documents. Given everything that we've been talking about, is there any way to fix that initial problem?
Well, I think it's unrealistic to expect the average person or even the average lawyer. I mean, I can't say that. I mean, I've read through our documents, but I can't say that before we bought our home that I read all 125 pages of the deck and the articles of incorporation and the bylaws. I probably scanned through it, but I think what might be helpful is to, if an association had a so-called Cliff Notes version of their governing documents, including their rules and regulations, a 3 or 4 page summary of, the highlights. You can't park commercial vehicles, pet restrictions, rental restrictions. The key items that you probably see most often in your practice that, raise issues in the community because somebody wants to have 4 dogs, or somebody wants to have a 70-pound dog and there's only a 50-pound limit, or whatever the case may be. I think maybe having some sort of summary like that might help alleviate some of the issues. Although I suspect at the end of the day, people tend to want what they want. They don't care necessarily what's in the documents.
But there is such a summary requirement for condos. It's called a frequently asked question and answer sheet. But what you're suggesting is extending that to Chapter 720 in Florida, which is the HOA Act. So there's no similar requirement statutorily for one in a Florida homeowners association. But that doesn't mean, I think it's a good suggestion, there's a reason that is a requirement under 718. It's because, again, people don't read. They're not going to delve into a 125-page, set of governing documents with all the amendments there too. So that little summary, which tells you what the use restrictions are, am I subject to a master association? Is there any ongoing litigation in the community? Things like that will help people make better purchase decisions. I've had realtors on the podcast. I've had state legislators on the podcast. And this is a theme that keeps coming up, is how can we make the community association lifestyle a better fit for the people living in it?
Well, the comment you just made raises a different issue. People, when they buy a house, they buy a condo, they hire an inspection company to check out the guts of make sure the toilet's flush, make sure there's no roof leaks, make sure there's no termites, things like that. What they really should be doing, and it's probably particularly true in condos, especially in light of recent changes to the law and in the aftermath of the Champlain Towers tragedy, you really should be doing financial due diligence on the association, as well as structural due diligence. I think you mentioned before about the engineer. You want to ask for financial statements, budgets. You want to ask if there's special assessments. You want to ask if it's an older building, have they done their 40-year certification? I guess now it's a 30-year certification. You really want to, if you're smart, you don't want surprises. Even if you make a decision whether to go forward, if there's some issues in the building and some potential issues, you really want to make an informed decision. So doing the kind of financial and building integrity due diligence is vital nowadays, especially when you're buying in an older condo.
The lifestyle's not for everyone, but many people bought in community associations because, number one, they saw it as a more cost-effective alternative. I want to live on the beach, but I can't afford a single-family home on the beach. I can afford a condo unit or co-op unit on the beach. But there are still people and groups out there that don't believe volunteer boards can properly govern communities. And I realize that we've been spoiled because we've been living in a very well-run community, although the first community we lived in was not so well-run. So what would you say to critics of the community association lifestyle who don't really feel that volunteer boards could run these communities?
I'm not sure what the alternative would be. If you're going to have communal living where groups of owners, either in a homeowners association where they have common elements or roadways or whatever to maintain, or you're going to live together in a building where you're going to own your unit, but there's some master association or association above the unit owners is going to run the common elements. I'm not sure what the solution would be. Obviously, boards of directors, when necessary, hire professionals like management companies, security companies. They outsource some of the work, and that's smart. But somebody has to be the general contractor, so to speak. And if it's not the board of directors being the general contractor over the subcontractors like the management company, who's it going to be? You're going to appoint some sort of third party person that you're going to have to pay anyway.
It's not going to be run by consensus, because we know the ability to achieve a consensus is highly unlikely. And I don't see cities taking back these associations either. I think the cities, for the most part, appreciate the fact that you've got, volunteer boards running these communities. They don't have their code enforcement that has to deal with all the different issues because the HOA board is dealing with it. So I really don't see cities jumping in to fill the void. Do you?
No, cities, when a home is in an unincorporated area or an area where there's no, association, they have a little bit more involvement. But, using an example of a condo association, is the city going to be involved in helping the association pass a board budget? That's not workable. And frankly, as a society, do we really want more government involvement in our life? I don't think so. But
I do see the other side of the argument, which is people say it's hard to find housing outside a mandatory community association. So on the one hand, you say make sure it's a good fit, living under an association that's governed by an elected board of directors and that's tasked with enforcing rules and regulations, some of which you as a homeowner might not agree with. The flip side of that is great, but where can I buy where it's not part of a community association?
Well, what does that tell you? I mean, if we live in a capitalist free market society, supposedly, and if the vast majority of available housing is through, especially newer housing, is through community associations, either newly developed condos or newly developed homeowner association communities, I think that tells you that the market is speaking, and that's where the majority of people want to live.
I don't know if you remember when we went on vacation to Costa Rica, our guide, I asked him, we were telling them what we did for a living, and I mentioned condo attorney. He said the condominium form of ownership is outlawed under the Costa Rican Constitution. Do you remember that?
I remember his name was Enrique, but I do not remember him saying that condos were abolished by the Constitution.
Well, it may no longer be true, but back then it was, and that was like 15 years ago. He had said that condominiums were outlawed under Costa Rican Constitution. I remember some things and you don't. Maybe this is why we're a good fit. So I want to ask you, we're running out of time. We've said so many good things. Is there anything about living in a community association that irritates you? Because you've been a big fan throughout this episode.
I mean, I'm biased. I love where we live, and much to your chagrin, if you told me, and hopefully it's a long time from now, that they're going to wheel me out of my house here, I would be fine with that. But so you're fine with everything living in a community association. You have no gripes. Well, I grew up in apartment buildings, so I have a different perspective, but, I lived in apartment buildings where sometimes, and I remember specifically, this is during college, I lived in a dorm where the people above us were really loud and played music that I didn't particularly care for at all hours of the night. I mean, that's the kind of problem that if you lived in a condo, and I know you're very sensitive to noise, I'm not sure that would work for us. But in a homeowners association, I mean, we're lucky. I have no complaints about where we live. And, if we had bad neighbors, then, I'm sure I'd have plenty of complaints. So
has it, I got to ask you this question. Has it been a blast being married to a community association attorney?
Well, I'm going to answer this very carefully.
Choose your words carefully.
I'm going to say it's been a blast. It's been a blast being married to you. I'm not sure it's because you're a community association attorney. Although I do have a funny story that relates to being married to somebody who's so well known in the industry. I think I may have mentioned before, I play a lot of tennis, and I was down playing tennis just a few years ago. And after I finished, I was just sitting, getting ready to head home. And a gentleman who's not a member of the club happened to be taking a lesson. He had just finished. And we struck up a conversation, and I mentioned that I was an attorney, and he started to tell me a story about a problem he was having with his, and I think he was from New York. I think it was with his co-op, funny enough, a problem he was having with his co-op up in New York. And I said, you know what? You're having a conversation with the wrong Berger attorney. You need to talk to my wife, Donna Berger. And his response was priceless. He said to me, with the funniest expression, he goes, "You're Donna Berger's husband?" and I just started cracking up and said, "Yeah, I'm Mr. Donna Berger, the one and only."
I bet you love that.
No, I really did, and it's funny because he said it in a way that I know he was, it was obvious he was impressed with you, and I think he was somewhat impressed that I was actually married to you. So I took that as a compliment too.
You've been called Saint Michael before. We won't go into it, but you've gotten that the compliment for your tenacity. So I'm almost afraid to ask the last question before we say goodbye on this 50th episode, but here we go. So what is something people would be surprised to learn about me? I'm white knuckling it right now. I don't know what you're going to say.
Can I say two things?
Sure.
Okay. So one, some people may know, one is that your shoe collection would rival Imelda Marcos, who, for people who don't know, was the former prime minister, married to the prime minister of Philippines, who was known for having literally hundreds of pairs of shoes. And you could definitely give her a run for her money. The other one is that you are an awesome cook, especially of Italian food. And I am very lucky to have eaten a lot of your meals over the years. So I'm not sure people would associate you necessarily as being a gourmet cook, but you are. And as our son Ryan used to say when he was like 4 or 5 years old, "Mommy is a good cooker," and he's definitely right.
Michael, it's been so nice to have you on the episode. I feel like we really avoided completing each other's sentences, given how long we've been together. But thanks for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. And is it safe for me to be home when you come home from work later today?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform or visit takeittotheboard.com for more ways to connect.